Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, thank you to Azif Nazrul to the all information he provided us about disinformation. It's an important topic we will discuss with our estimated speaker. And for me, it's a real pleasure to welcome to this session and of the Bay of Bengal conversation. My name is Laura Larocchia, and I work as a marketing and operation manager in Diesel Consulting. It is a consulting boutique in the south of Italy. As communication and marketing specialist, for me is I'm honored to talk about this to be moderator of this panel because this information for who work in communication and digital files is is one of the top challenges, and I look forward to discuss it with our speaker and with you. So first of all, I will start presenting our speaker. First, Miraj Ahmed Chaudhry, Managing Director at Digital Right in Bangladesh, who has a deep experience in digital rights and in disinformation. Then Raju Majara, Principal and Managing Attorney at Majara Law, who will talk about media governance. Then Leo Wigger, editor at Zenit magazine in Germany, known for its insightful analysis of global and regional issues. And then Siddharth Varadarajan, editor at The Wire in India, in Delhi, one of the leading voices in the independent journalism. And last but not least, Sheila Tasneem Haq, Senior Governance Specialist at UNDP Bangladesh, who focuses on governance and policy. So before to leave the words to our speaker, I will spend a few words on the topic. Our session is called Truth in the Crossfire, Navigating Journalism in the Age of Disinformation. And of course, maybe all of us as a specialist of communication, of journalism, is a topic that affects our works daily. But disinformation is a challenge that affects all of us because it affects all the information we touch every day. And especially in the Indo-Pacific region, disinformation has become a powerful tool for shaping opinion and destabilizing political situation. We've seen how during the recent election in Philippines, disinformation influenced voters through fake news, and in other countries provides the beginning of crisis. So that means that the impact of disinformation is serious, and it can damage trust in institutions, create social tension, and manipulate public opinion. Journalists today face a difficult task of providing accurate information and select this information in a digital world full of challenges and in a rapid change. So in this conversation, I would like to answer to some questions. First, who are different actors in this information? Then, what challenge journalists, government can face to combat it? And then, how can news organization and digital platform strengthen the credibility and reliability? So, I would like to start with some questions to our speaker, starting from Miraj Ahmed. And I will start talking about the situation in Bangladesh. So I would like to ask you, what are the most significant disinformation trends you have observed in Bangladesh and in the wider region in the recent years? Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, distinguished guests and attendees, everyone. Uh, I think this when we try to understand this information, one of the most important thing is to realize that lies are part of a social construct. So historically, people tell lies, and lies are part of our political process. Lies are part of our society, and lies are part of uh, i- like in every day of our social life. People tell lies in different ways. But why disinformation or misinformation in a digital world is so important? Because the digital technologies created industry of falsehoods. You know, so now disinformation is an industry. Uh, there are people who coordinate uh, network to produce disinformation to gain political advantage, economic advantage, or say their advantage on the basis of their belief systems. It can be religious, it can be social, it can be various other issues related to. So disinformation has been industrialized. That is first thing. That said, when it comes to trend, I think one of the significant factor that has evolved so far due to the advent of social media is that those who have more power and those who have more money, or those who have either of them or both, can influence social discourse through disinformation in various ways. The more power you have or more money you have, you can produce and sway public opinion through different narratives uh, in a modern world. This is why we see during elections there are rise of disinformation. During political conflicts, we see a rise in disinformation. During religious conflicts, we see a sharp rise in disinformation. So one of the major contribution of disinformation in our society is its polarizing factor. Whatever is polarized, whatever polarizes our society, disinformation plays a direct role in our society in that particular area. So politics has become a polarizing factor, and disinformation amplifies it. Religion has become a polarizing factor, and disinformation amplifies it. But when it comes to industrialization of disinformation, traditionally what we would see is that there are political actors who drives, produce, and amplifies it. There are religious or philosophy motivated actors like religious actors who drive, amplify misinformation and disinformation based on their political ideology. But with the advent of social media and their monetization scheme and algorithms, what we see nowadays, there are monetized actors. That said, they are financially motivated actors. They spread disinformation and misinformation to spread uh, falsehood, but also to earn money. So they can be hired. They can be hired by political parties. They can be hired by powerful business entities, corporate interests, foreign influence, foreign influence organizations. So this industry is largely served by the algorithmic amplification of platforms that often we misunderstand when we see the trends in misinformation and disinformation in all of the countries in the region. Having said that, giving this backdrop, even in Bangladesh and in India, we have seen how disinformation played out in different elections. For example, in Bangladesh, sometimes you will see minorities are under attack. So before the elections and political events. In India, minorities were under attack during their elections as well. There was Islamophobia. So why this comes? Because religion is a polarizing factor, and during election it plays a very strong role, and it really is being used to polarize the society further to generate vote or consensus or support to a particular political opinion. So we also see targeted attacks on person. Often disinformation is considered as only negative information, but often we see disinformation is being spread to create a divine identity among a political party that this is probably the best person in the world, you should vote for him. Because disinformation often creates to build a person's persona, which is false. You know? So it has various phases, but to be frank, the most alarming part of this information is how it changes democratic narratives and how it really stoke fear before democratic elections and other periods, so that the society become more polarized and the radical forces, authoritarian forces, take advantage of it. So I think in the contemporary discussion of disinformation, the most important factor is who is funding disinformation and how, and of course, how platforms are contributing to this amplification of disinformation because they are also profiting from it, and how political actors are weaponizing disinformation and platforms to sway public opinion and impact the democratic processes, also influence operations. I would like to stop there. If it talks about trends, maybe you have further questions later, no? Is it okay, Laura? Okay.
Thank you for this first look that helped us to understand the overview of the situation of disinformation with a deep dive in Bangladesh, and especially appreciate the look about the role also of social media that really characterize the spread of disinformation and the digital era we live in. Thank you. So now I would like to turn to Raju Mahajan. And I would like to ask you, in your point of view, in your opinion, what are the responsibility of this digital platform and even of the government when it comes to protecting user both from disinformation and protecting his own data?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. You just heard from Dr. Asif Nazrul, our honorable advisor. He's a lawyer and also he was a journalist before. Similarly, I was a journalist before I'm a lawyer. So today I'm going to talk more from a journalistic and also legal point of view. And I will try to focus more on the governance side of media because most of the time we do not address governance issues regarding media. So the interesting part is when we talk about digital platform, nowadays everything is digital. Like in our television, our radio, newspaper, cinema, even like a podcast and everything, like YouTube, Facebook, so all the social media, everything is digital. So when we talk about digital media, we basically talk about everything. So to address the spread of misinformation, disinformation, I have some proposals. So after this panel discussion, I have some copies of my proposals. If any of you are interested, I can give a copy. This is kind of my proposal to all of you. So I think, the way doctors and lawyers and pharmacists, they're like a licensed profession. I think journalists should be licensed profession too. There should be a minimum requirement of education. There should be ethics education. There should be like a licensing exam. Those who pass this licensing exam, they will be identified as journalists, and then they can work as a journalist. By doing this, we can ensure that those who are working as a journalist, they are following certain guidelines and they are not doing any harm to the society by spreading misinformation and disinformation. Previously, not only in Bangladesh, in many other countries, we have seen that a lot of journalists, they do not work for the people. They work for the media house they work for, and most of the media house are owned by corporate companies and also a lot of political parties. So those journalists, they basically work as a PR for different corporations or like a government or like a political parties. So I think a licensing mechanism, like a registration mechanism, can bring some justice to the it can help reduce misinformation and disinformation. My next proposal is I think government should encourage non-profit media. I think in Bangladesh, most of the media at this moment are for-profit corporations are owned by the government. I see some non-profit media in America, also in Europe. So I think Like for example, if I give you example, let's say 3 or 4 journalists, they come together and they form a non-profit organization, and the purpose of this non-profit organization is to work as a media. I think by doing this, this non-profit media, they can be accountable to the people, not to the any kind of business interest or other thing. And to help promote this kind of initiative, government can give them some tax break, some subsidies, and some other way to encourage them. And also people, I humbly request people to pay for the news. I know that a lot of news organizations, they struggle to make money because people have a tendency to get free information. Nothing is free in this world. If you do not pay for anything, someone else is paying for that, and the person who are going to pay for your information, they have some interest. So people also have responsibility to pay for the source of the information, so that you know that the information you're getting is catered to you, not for some other purposes. My next proposal is, for-profit media, like owned by a corporation or other thing, there should be some. Let me read it from my. So, for-profit mass media's corporate good governance must be ensured by proper reporting and monitoring mechanism. Most of the for-profit media here in Bangladesh and also many parts of the world, there is no proper governance system. We do not know who is the president, and the other stakeholders of this for-profit corporation. So they are not, there's not enough proper reporting mechanism and also monitoring whether they are actually doing their job as a media. My another proposal is that, as I said, a lot of media house, they are kind of a propaganda machine by either government or political parties or some corporate organizations. So there should be a totally separate legal mechanism for a mass media and public relation media. If a television channel work as a public relation outlet for the corporate house owned by this media, then we should treat them as a public relation company. It's not a mass media. So the difference between mass media and public relation media is not defined very well, not only in Bangladesh, and also many parts of the world. So my proposal would be to make this make this difference clear, so that people understand which one is a mass media and which one is a public relation media. My another proposal, this is specific to Bangladesh. I know there is a government radio channel, it's called Bangladesh Betar. So there's also a government radio channel in America, we call it NPR. So I would like Bangladesh Betar to follow NPR's governance style. So I'm not going to talk detail about NPR's governance style because that will take a long time, but my recommendation to all the responsible person here, you can study the governance mechanism of NPR, and I think Bangladesh Betar not only follow the governance style, also the way they use like a modern technology, latest technology to reach to the people. Bangladesh Betar can do that. My another proposal is, there's a government-owned television here in Bangladesh. It's called BTV, Bangladesh Television. I don't think Bangladesh government needs a television channel. It's just a waste of taxpayers' money. So my proposal would be to shut down BTV and save that money and use it for some other purpose. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your claps. So and also as she said, digital platforms. Everything is digital nowadays. So I am a big believer of freedom of speech, freedom of press. So people should be allowed to talk anything that they like within the legal framework. And the job of the government would protect these people from foreign entities and bad people. Government should not suppress any free speech, not only in Bangladesh, anywhere in the world. Like, if I give you example of America, a lot of Russian organization, like Iranian organization, North Korean organization, they try to infiltrate through social media like Facebook, YouTube, and they try to influence our election, our society. So the job of the government is to stop these foreign spies, foreign entities to influence our election and other things. But the government should ensure that the people of that country, like people of Bangladesh, they should be able to express their opinion, even though it goes against the government. So that's my opinion about digital platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Raju. Thank you for your legal perspective. It's very useful for this conversation. And you talk a lot about government, and you talk about what we can do, especially in a local area. But in the interconnected world we live in, do you think that could be more efficient, or could be a solution maybe in the future to have a sort of international laws that help to solve this the problem of disinformation?
Are you asking the question to me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Can you ask again?
Yeah. If in your perspective, from since you talk about the governance point of view and legal perspective, if maybe in the future you think that international law that help to stop the spread of disinformation can be a solution that we can adopt or not.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very good question. So let me tell you about America. I'm from America, even though I was born and raised in Bangladesh. So we have two layers of government. One is the state government and one is the federal government. So freedom of speech is ensured by the federal constitution, meaning federal government. And this is a very, very common conflict all the time. We see that some of the speech that is allowed by the federal government but not allowed by the state government. But since federal government has more power, they trumps the state laws and other things. So on a whole, the American freedom of speech part is dominated by the federal constitution, federal laws, federal judicial system. Now, the world, our current world is a very global platform. So today, let's say I'm posting something in Bangladesh, but I have friends in America, I have friends in Europe, South America, China, India, everywhere. So my friends, they can see it, they can give reaction, like love reaction, like reaction, angry reaction. So since the world is coming together as a global village, I think we have to form some kind of international code. I know there's like an international criminal code, international civil code, but they're not functioning at this moment as we want. And there's a lot of challenges to do that. It's not very easy because in the current world order, our sovereign entity is the state, the country. There is no international organization that has the sovereign authority. So if you want to implement a international law governing freedom of speech, that will be very difficult. Because let me give you an example. In America, LGBTQ rights are well established. You cannot say anything bad about them. That would be hate speech. On the other hand, if you go to, let's say, Russia, Iran, or many other part of the world, LGBTQ rights are not established like, Europe or America. So you cannot express your opinion for them in those countries. Now, if there is any unified law for the whole world, as international law, it would be very difficult to implement that law. Also, law doesn't work by itself. Law needs law enforcement. So, police and other law enforcement entities. So there is no international, there's the Interpol, but Interpol is not an independent organization. It consists of local police departments. So this is a good proposal to have an international court, international law to govern free speech, freedom of speech, freedom of press and media. However, I don't think that is going to happen within very short time, like at least not within 50 years. But this is a good proposal. So what we can actually do is we can advocate. Like especially those countries, they do not ensure freedom of speech and freedom of press for their people. We as a global citizen, we can go and advocate for freedom of speech in those countries and try to make some kind of similarities with Western world. And I think that is more pragmatic at this moment rather than trying to form a code or trying to implement like international law.
Yeah. So it's a long way, but it's something we can think about. Thank you again for your, especially for your solution approach oriented. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now, next, Leo. Always talking about the international context. I would like to ask you, how does the rise of disinformation affect the international information? Since, as I mentioned before, our world is interconnected, globalization. So, what do you think?
Thank you so much for your great question. Let me connect that maybe to Bangladesh and the revolution in Bangladesh and how international media were able or failed to report on that. But before I start with that, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the team of CGS, and especially actually the people in the second and third row, Generation Z, Gen Z, who did a lot of good work here in a very short amount of time, and I'm really appreciating that. So thank you for that. 2 months, I think, and a lot of hard work, and you put it all together. Thank you. So what I wanted to say is basically, I mean, there are lots of challenges for media and reporting at the moment, and they have a logical effect on reporting, on international reporting, on international events. For example, on the revolution in Bangladesh. So let me start with issues of journalism first. So one issue, of course, is the rise of AI-generated journalism. What does it mean? It means that there are a lot of videos and images produced that are of questionable origin, are confusing, are often falsified, which means that the very essence of what is meant by reality is under pressure. We hardly know sometimes. It takes a lot of media literacy to actually be able to differentiate AI, fake news, disinformation from reality. This has a huge impact on journalism all over the world and on media consumption. So disinformation is, of course, closely linked to that. And I think it's fair to say that there's an unprecedented amount of orchestrated disinformation campaigns happening in the world at the moment. Orchestrated disinformation campaigns are nothing new. They always happen, but I think at the moment we really see an unprecedented amount in the world. And I mean, there's I don't know if you know the company Statista. It's a German company that creates kind of statistics basically online, and they have an interesting statistic that 40% of respondents globally admitted to accidentally sharing fake news with others. So this is really showing the amount of the problem. It's huge all over the world. And this leads to another problem, which is the lost in trust in media. We see this everywhere. There are lots of statistics around from the US, from the Indo-Pacific, from Germany as well, where I come from, that traditional media are really losing a lot of trust. And this has exacerbated massively over the last 2 to 3 years from, for example, in the US, from more than 50% of trust levels to just 26% of trust in media. This has a huge effect as well, and is also, again, exacerbated by something else, which is the lesser and lesser amount of money that is in journalism. So this has a lot of effect. I mean, if you want to make money in media, you're not going to join a newspaper today, obviously, but you're going to be an influencer. But this really alters the, connection between the media and the persons that you're reporting about, So obviously, influencers are much more willing, usually, to report positively on the subject that they're covering, because they also have much less incentives, or their incentives are different ones, and this has also a huge impact. Another impact is, of course, that international media houses are closing down their presences all over the world. There are less and less correspondents around, and then, of course, media and information is disseminated and checked, consumed on platforms like X. What is X? X is formerly Twitter, owned by Elon Musk, who has really altered personally, very much personally, the information that people receive all over the world. Huge impact on the information that people all over the world receive, and it's basically one single person. I mean, there's a joke in Berlin, because he happened to buy X right after a visit to Berlin. He has a Tesla factory right around the corner, and he did not get into a nightclub in Berlin, a famous one called Berghain. And he was, mocked all over X, all over Twitter at that time for that. And then he just bought it. Probably it was not connected, but it really changed everything, because suddenly he could really much more control the information that was presented about him. So what does this mean for example, international media coverage on a situation like the revolution in Bangladesh? First, access. Less money, less correspondence, less access because, for example, visa regimes are increasingly restrictive for journalists. In many places, media have to be embedded with military or government, which heavily affects reporting as well. You obviously have a bias if you're embedded with an armed force active in a conflict. So this makes a huge difference as well. Then disinformation. I mean, if we think about disinformation in Bangladesh, obviously there was a lot of misinformation circulating, flying around the internet during the revolution and afterwards. I mean, we talked about that already, but you see one picture of, you know, Americans in St. Martin's Island, you might have questions about the authenticity or whether this really is relevant for what's happening in Bangladesh. But if your entire timeline is flooded with this information, let that sink in. You slowly start like thinking about maybe there's something true about this, maybe the Americans are behind this, maybe this could be true. Even though you later might find out that the pictures that were used were actually not from St. Martin's in Bangladesh, but from St. Martin Island in the Caribbean. This is really, I think, something that happened. I mean, there were some accounts that were doing that. And this has an impact, you know, especially if you can't verify information because you don't have access. And so quantity matters, money matters, because like essentially you need a lot of money to disseminate vast amounts of orchestrated fake news. So if you want to, you know, go behind that, that's also a question of resources. And yeah, very difficult to verify information. And if you think about the July massacre, for example, there are factors like the internet blockade that the government implemented after a very, very bloody protest the day before. And this worked, of course, you know, like there was very little access for international journalists to actually verify what happened on the streets of Dhaka and other places of Bangladesh in that very moment, because this was a very effective tool in suppressing the amount of police violence that took place, and it made it more difficult for international journalists to unveil the truth. Another example is that, for example, the government also claimed some things. For example, that they only used, the police forces only used rubber bullets instead of proper actual bullets, which they used if there's no access to the country and there's no internet blockade. And if there's an internet blockade and you can't verify information. So this all makes things more complicated. Does it mean that it's impossible to report? No, it was not. I can tell from my own personal experience it's possible to report. We had many stories on the events in Bangladesh, in Germany, including on front pages of national newspapers, but it makes it more complicated. However, I think if, you know, eventually you need to resort to more old school techniques of journalism, it's more and more of an uphill battle to, you know, uncover the truth, but the truth can prevail and will eventually make its way through international audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. As you mentioned, I mean, I agree. Probably the first solution for disinformation is that people has to learn. All of us have to learn how to recognize fake news and not share with other people. Of course, is not easy, but maybe something that we can do all together, and that can be the first step of solution of the spread of disinformation.
Of course, and I think this also means, of course, that, I mean, this should be part of school curricula, right? All over the world, that people learn how to handle information, how to verify information, how to deal with, you know, like technologies to actually make an ethical use of them. So I think this is very crucial, and this is also, of course, important for think tanks, for NGOs, for civil society to really work on that.
Yeah. And now I will give some, let's hear from Siddharth and his point of view. I would like to have a deep dive about the political situation and the propaganda. So I would like to ask you how the use of how was the use of the information in India for the propaganda? What's the
Right.
situation?
Thank you for that question, and thank you to CGS for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be in Dhaka, post-revolutionary Dhaka, and I'm very, very happy to be here. You know, when we speak of the topic of disinformation, it's important to bear in mind that in virtually every country in the world, disinformation does not fall from the sky and is not the product, overwhelmingly, the product of guys who live in their basements, working alone with some sinister objective. The bulk of disinformation coursing through the information sewers of the world originate with governments. They originate with ruling political parties, they originate with very powerful sectors. And this is something we often lose sight of. The technology of dissemination has changed. So disinformation can be injected into the worldwide information circuitry and be made to spread very fast. The velocity of circulation is much higher than anything we've seen before. But the basic premise that disinformation is a central part of the toolkit of political parties, of governments, has not changed. So, while I think it's important that we talk about disinformation and we have heightened awareness of topics like fake news and so on and so forth, this isn't really such a new problem as far as the world is concerned. We're just dealing with a different technological manifestation of it. And, we need to find ways to do that, obviously. But it's not something that we need to get unduly worried about or, reach a point where we feel helpless at combating disinformation and misinformation on this scale. The second point is that the spread of disinformation in a conscious fashion almost always is accompanied by the criminalization or delegitimization of lawful speech. In India, it shouldn't come as any surprise that the same ruling party, the same government, which is the source of so much of disinformation, particularly at election time, and I'll speak about that in a second, has also taken upon itself the task of passing new laws, rules, drafting new regulations that make it much more difficult to exercise legitimate free speech, and they do so by criminalizing free speech. And regrettably, this isn't something that's happening only in India, in many countries, including in countries that, in places like Bangladesh and India, we always used to have a certain view that the United Kingdom is has a much more sensible approach to freedom of speech than we do in our part of the world. Even there now you see the misuse of anti-terrorism legislation in order to curb certain kinds of speech critical of Israel. And this is the new reality. In India, the government went so far as to legislate or to create new rules for the Information Technology Act that would empower government departments to declare a certain piece of news fake and to then order its deletion or removal, or to put pressure on social media intermediaries to do that dirty work by threatening them with the withdrawal of their safe harbor protections. So in other words, if, let's say, the Ministry of Statistics decides that a certain article which critiques the government's macroeconomic data, if the Ministry of Statistics says that this article is fake, then the rule was structured in such a way as to get the social media intermediaries, Twitter, Facebook, and so on, to delete that content and ensure it doesn't circulate. Fortunately, some of us went to court in India and we were able to put a stop, have a stay put on that attempt to label fake news and to give government that power. But the aim of the government still remains. And I'm mentioning this because these are two sides of the same coin. The same Prime Minister who can give an interview in the middle of the last Lok Sabha election campaign where he cites very, very dubious and dodgy a population report to claim that in India the population of Hindus, the percentage of Hindus is coming down and eventually this country may not be Hindu. Completely unscientific, bogus data, and the Prime Minister can speak about this and give an interview and promote this idea in the middle of an election campaign, and the same Prime Minister wants to introduce rules which will declare other speech and other reports as fake. It's breathtaking. The idea that politicians think they can get away with this. We are right now in the midst of an election campaign for two important states in India, Maharashtra and Jharkhand. And it may surprise the audience here that Bangladesh and Bangladeshis have become an important issue in Jharkhand. Of course, they don't use the word Bangladeshi. We have a very peculiar term in India to refer to undocumented migrants, and that term is infiltrator. I don't know how many of you have heard the term infiltrator or know what it, like in the normal course, the word infiltrator is meant to conjure up the idea of a man crossing the border with a gun in order to perpetrate some act of violence. Here, an undocumented migrant is called an infiltrator. The government has no data or information about the number of people who are crossing the border without documents. It has no data about the number of people who have entered Jharkhand purportedly from Bangladesh. Jharkhand does not even have a border with Bangladesh. The person in charge of the Indian border is the Home Minister of India, who is the one talking about the danger of unchecked migration. And this is fake. This is a textbook example of disinformation. Weaponizing disinformation in order to spread fear, insecurity, to polarize the people on religious lines. And to imagine that this is happening from people in authority who then in turn are attempting to limit and circumscribe the right of others to speak and to publish. This tells you the true nature of the crisis. I was looking at Donald Trump's 5-point agenda on what he says protecting free speech, and there's some interesting points there. For example, and I think if the US government and governments around the world were to follow that, for example, he says no government department should be in the business of certifying what is acceptable and what is not acceptable speech. Fine, excellent. But he then goes on to say that there should be limits, for example, on quote unquote promoting terrorism. Now, if the idea of promoting terrorism is understood in a rational and a narrow way, nobody would have any objection. But more often than not, terms such as this are used in order to brand criticism, brand certain arguments, brand certain forms of speech as illegitimate, as illegal, and as terrorist. So I think that we are passing through a very difficult stage today. And I fear that, I mean, not that we can avoid talking about disinformation and fake news, but governments around the world have weaponized the concept, weaponized the fight against fake news in order to try to curb legitimate expression. And I would say, given, if we have to pick, if Sophie were to make a choice between allowing fake news or, civil society finding its own way to deal with disinformation on the one hand, and empowering politicians like Donald Trump or Narendra Modi or Sheikh Hasina or anybody else of that kind to decide what's fake and what's not, what is disinformation or what's not, it would be far better to let civil society, leave them in charge and not empower politicians. I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In a sentence or in 2-3 words, it's hard. Is hardest to rebuild the trust of people about social media or about institution.
No, there's a great decline in public trust in the media across the world.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you.
And this is something that, as a journalist, that worries me, and we have to find ways of dealing with it. And it's not as if we don't have answers, but this is a big challenge for the media. But this is a challenge that we have to confront without looking to the government to create regulations or rules that would eventually harm freedom of the press.
Thank you very much. And really, it was very inspiring the situation about propaganda, political way. This is a really bad use of information and fake news. So thank you for this precious point of view. And now, last but not least, I would like to ask something to Sheila. Sheila, I would like to move from political to governance about company, even in the private sector. I would like to know from your perspective, what's the government framework of disinformation in Bangladesh? So we are returning to Bangladesh after a little round around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Let me also thank CGS, and we are also part of this Bay of Bengal. It's like 3 consecutive years that Bay of Bengal has been held in Bangladesh, and I think we from UNDP were partner of this discussion from the onset of this Bay of Bengal discussion. But I think that if I would be interested myself and also ask CGS colleagues to see the discussion on the misinformation last year and talking about this misinformation this year, how the landscape is also changing our own thinking pattern or looking into the misinformation. Because the world has changed, the geopolitics has changed, Bangladesh has also changed. So it's important, I think, that when you talk about governance, unfortunately we cannot leave the politics out of it, but I think that we see it more from a framework, how we take it to the broader landscape. Before I start, I was watching the room, and I think that, like me, everybody was looking into the drone. I'm sure that you all are. I was. So this could be another tool of misinformation. Who knows? But like exactly what we are seeing in the misinformation is the whole AI that one of our panelists was talking about. So I think that when we talk about misinformation, disinformation, the tools that we are also seeing, how it's also impacting the mindset, the whole issue of the narrative, how this deep fake news is also changing the mindset of an individual. So it's very important when you talk about the framework, but before that, let me also look into some of the areas that we have been talking about disinformation, misinformation, which I also think that is very much transboundary in nature. So it doesn't stay within the certain periphery of a nation and state. It goes beyond that, as some of our panelists were saying. It's a global connectivity, it's a global citizenship. So there are a lot of issues that are also evolving in you talk about the misinformation, disinformation. But I think this also is important to understand the definition a bit of it, how we define it. And also one of the things that we certain time we talk about it, but not so much, how this disinformation, misinformation globally is also increasing the whole issue on the hate speech. This is very much interrelated. So it's very important the role of the state, the role of the civil society, the role of the private sector to come together when you talk about a framework. So if you look into the framework, what really exists to look into this whole misinformation, disinformation landscape, as we have seen in Bangladesh, I will not repeat, but I'll also sort of just have a quick pick on some of the issues that we picked in 2023, 2024, and of course, the revolution that we have seen. It's a digital battleground, if say, quote unquote. So how the digital battleground it is. So as you see that a lot of troll have been there, a lot of misinformation has been there. Again, like what is the misinformation? It's talking about the narrative. It could be religious narrative, it could be a cultural narrative, it could be more of an understanding of the misogynistic understanding as well. So these are the evolving areas that we see in the realm of misinformation and disinformation. So if you look into who are those institutions or stakeholders looking into that, we are talking about the fact checkers, we are talking about the media, we are talking about the social platforms, talking about Facebook, Meta, the Twitter. There are other groups as well that we know that use different other methods and tools to spread different misinformation. If you look into the more the religious perspective, the extremist view that we have picked up over the years. We also have seen the subscription of certain channels have also increased in the last couple of months in Bangladesh as well. So it's very important how we monitor that, how we should be also a bit conscious about it. In fact, if you talk about, again, going back to the fact checkers, we talk about a lot on debunking the misinformation. But again, you see in the age of technology, it's very difficult to debunk the misinformation, disinformation as well, because the fact checkers community globally they're there, but they're also very limited in numbers. There's also issue of capacity, the issue of their framework as well, how the fact checkers will be performing. There are also sort of other stakeholders like the social media platform that we are all very much looking into. So that's very important, but if I come back to the framework itself, it's very difficult when you talk about how you debunk the misinformation. So let's look into how preemptive measures could be taken to look into the tackling the misinformation. It is very important to have a preemptive strategies from all of us to understand how we can sort of, before we even debunk it, it's very important the social media, all the actors we talked about should come together and address those issues. Secondly, it's very important the democratic institution to be more effective. The more democratic institution are effective, the accountability mechanism are established, grievance redressal mechanism. I think that in this coming 3 days, we'll be talking about anti-corruptions. We're talking about different other areas where we also talk about different government institution and mechanism that exist. So it's all interrelated. This is not separated. As we have seen in June and July, in August, how people's aspiration came all together, because you have to have a certain platform that you can talk about your understanding, your grievances, which needs to have a platform itself. So it's very important, it's interlinked. But if you look into the whole landscape of the global politics, it's of course certain part is grievance, but also understanding how you navigate the politics in different directions. So it's very important in that landscape to understand where we stand with that. So on the framework, again, coming back, Bangladesh needs to also look into some of those acts that exist, the Digital Security Act, Open Governance Act, Governance Data Act. So there are a couple of acts that already exist. There's also in discussion on the AI policy, that's a framework that UNDP is helping the government to frame it for the last couple of months. So we are in the area where we are looking into the AI, which is very much important to tackle those misinformation and disinformation. And also the social cohesion part. I think that's very important, where we bring the citizen into the discussion. The Gen Z population need to have a more digital literacy, of how to use those information not as a misinformation, but information to change the perspective, change the landscape, the way we want to change it, the way we want Bangladesh and the different part of the world where we have a state where people's voices matters. So that's very important. So misinformation have different tools, technology, which we cannot avoid. It will happen. The world will change. AI is happening. Who knows, some other tools would be coming in the horizon soon. But the question is that how we as a group sitting here in this platform today come together, talk about those mechanisms, and also sort of understand how the private sector, especially all the social media group, can be also looking into the social responsibility framework that they all are adhere to as well. So it's very important that the state, the civil society, and the private sector, especially the social media companies, come together, act on some of this misinformation, which also spread hate speech across the globe. And Bangladesh is not different from there at all. We have seen the transboundary nature of the misinformation. Going forward, one of our panelists was talking about our neighbor, India. It's very important that we have a BIMSTEC as a platform. We have SARC as a platform. So we should act as a nation altogether. It's beyond the boundaries. So is misinformation not a localized issue anymore? So it's very important that the governance framework within the country, the regional perspective needs also to be brought in, and also understanding the whole Indo-Pacific politics that's also emerging as the Bay of Bengal is mandated to look into and talk about it. So we put that into as a framework, not just Bangladesh as a framework in the whole misinformation and disinformation and tackling those. Because hate speech, when you talk about hate speech, it doesn't stay within the boundary itself. It's a trans-boundary issue. So it's very important that we address it. Of course, different generation, the Gen Z, and I think that only we should not be putting all the responsibilities on them as well. We as a state, we as a citizen, we as an individual, as the UN, we should all be coming together and go forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila, for your perspective, especially on the private sector that is another actor of the society, of every society. Now I will just take a few minutes if there's just 1-2 questions. So yeah, please. If you can please specify to whom you can direct your question if there's a specific person. Thank you.
I have an open question. We can often see state and non-state actors around the world.
Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you speak a little bit?
We can often see government and non-state actors around the world politicizing media and manipulating information to disrupt public sentiment. How does this erosion of trust in journalism undermine democratic institutions and processes? And what role can news organizations play in restoring public faith while navigating pressures from political entities? I have another question to Mr. Siddharth specifically. After the fall of the fascist regime in Bangladesh, we have noticed many Indian outlets have been accused of spreading politically motivated disinformation, leading to a loss of trust among the Bangladeshi population. How do you think Indian media can restore faith and credibility in the future?
Both your questions are part of the same. I'll very briefly answer that. There is a serious issue of credibility, no doubt. And that's because the bulk of big media in India has abandoned the path of actually doing journalism and are quite comfortable to serve as a propaganda arm of those who are in power. So the stories that you saw, which tried to portray the revolution in Bangladesh in very negative light, I would say were inspired by the foreign policy vision of those in Delhi who had placed all their faith and their support in Sheikh Hasina, and were very disappointed at the fact that she was thrown out. So, you know, frankly, I'm not sure what we can expect from this media, because the same media which has done an act of disinformation as far as Bangladesh is concerned regularly commits the same crime within India. They will misrepresent the farmers' movement, they will misrepresent all kinds of issues in order to promote official propaganda. So I think that in Bangladesh and in India and around the world, people are turning to independent digital platforms that have more credibility for their news rather than depending on big legacy media. I think most of these channels and newspapers are beyond the possibility of any reform.
Hello everyone, I'm Noreen Sultana, studying mass communication and journalism in University of Dhaka. So my question is, if fact-checking is considered a part of journalism and state-led journalism often faces credibility issues, how can the CA press wing ensure public trust in its fact-checking initiatives? A study by Lupa and IFCN signatory found that 52% of reports from Brazil contra fake lacked transparency or relied solely on government sources. Doesn't this pose a risk to transparency? The report also noted that the initiative primarily targeted disinformation related to the government's own interest. For example, when recent questions were raised about the country's law and order situation, the CA press facts labeled the report as misleading without providing the necessary documentation to ensure transparency and contained pro-government narratives. How do you address these concerns? And shouldn't the government focus more on promoting media literacy over fact-checking? And I'd love if anyone from the panel answers the question. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Please, in just
This is a very hard question.
less than 1
So,
minute.
for example, government engaging in fact-checking is very problematic, locally, internationally, because in that case, government becomes the arbiter of truth. No, it is risky. But I understand because of this surge of disinformation, CA press office may have decided, because they have been victim of disinformation and they are trying to clear their own position. I understand the urge, but government-sponsored fact-checking is equally problematic in any political context. No, so because it makes, like, for example, India, it was being attempted to establish by law. No, so but it is in many ways, even Indian courts said that it is unconstitutional. There are constitutional problems associated with it. Yes, I think one of the major problems globally is structural. No? So most of the countries, particularly where democracy is eroding, many is considering disinformation is a national security problem. Disinformation is not a security problem. We should not consider disinformation as a security concern, rather than we should consider it as a social problem. No, this is part of a social contract. And how do you address that? You address that by providing more information, creating access and spread and amplification for quality information. No? And another approach is to do it, is to address it socially, is like media literacy and critical thinking capacity, so that people can question an information whether it is right or wrong, and they look for different opportunities. No? If you see it from a national security point of view, you end up with very stringent law, like in Cyber Security Act or Digital Security Act of Bangladesh. What happens is, like, when there are millions of information coming in a minute, you cannot really tackle it by law or policing. At some point, you need to tackle it by algorithms, by platforms, no? Because you cannot tackle misinformation at scale, no? With one law, with one police system. If you try to do that, you will be selective in your judgment. There will be arbitrary decisions. There will be pick and choose, like who are we going to send to jail and who we don't, no? So another way is like to fact-checking organizations, but they can only check only a very fragment of misinformation, very small fragment, because they can only check what is checkable. But there are various disinformation which is not checkable. If there is no checkable information in there to debunk. That said, the propaganda, adversarial narratives, hate speech, no? So a lot of narratives remain on the online platform that can be addressed socially. And I think there is a vital role of traditional media organizations. So far, media's role has been providing facts. But media has been traditionally away from identifying that this is wrong. I think in this age of disinformation, media can have their fact-checking units and say, oh, not only by providing fact, they can also have a fact-checking unit to say that this is a very harmful disinformation and this is why we should bring it to our audience. No, there could be reporting on that. But above all, I think the problem is social. It has to be addressed socially, not from a security lens, because otherwise it will be used to stifle expression, to carve legitimate expression.
Thank you very much, and thank you all the speakers for all this insight. And if you want, for all people who would like to interact, all the speakers are available to keep in touch and to have a conversation just here. So thank you again. This is really a topic that affects all of us, and I'm sure that start talking in a conference like this can start changing something first in each of us, and then on the government, companies, and so on and so forth. Thank you again, and enjoy the conference.